So it's really my pleasure to be joined today by Catherine Myers. Catherine is a painter whose gouache and oil paintings and recent works in video have been significantly inspired and informed by her engagement and research on the art and culture of India. In addition to her creative work, she has developed a series of video interviews with contemporary Indian artists and has curated several exhibitions on Indian art, including 4 at the William Benton Museum of Art, most recently Tradition and Transformation, Mithila Art of India. Myers has exhibited her work widely in the United States and India. Grants have included Fulbright fellowships to India in 2002, 2011, and 2020, individual artist grants in painting and new media from the Connecticut Commission on Arts and Culture in 1991, 2012, and 2019, and Marie Walsh Sharp Studio Space Program grants in 1991 and 1992. She received her BA from St. Xavier College in Chicago, an MFA in painting from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and has been teaching painting and drawing at UConn since 1984. So thanks so much, Catherine, for a really wonderful exhibition. I'm so excited to have it up through the summer. And really happy to have a fantastic series of programs also that you have organized. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. And again, thanks to you and Rachel and the Benton staff for doing such a marvelous job. I was at the show today and it just looks fabulous, and the support from the Benton to be able to create these exhibitions has just been amazing. And again, I'm so delighted to introduce this year's Radha Devi Joshi speaker, which also launches our exhibition of David Szanton. David has his BA from Harvard University and his PhD in anthropology from the University of Chicago. From 1991 to 2001, he was the executive director of international and area studies at the University of California in Berkeley. Prior to that, he was in the Social Science Research Council in New York City. And prior to that, he was a project specialist in Asian studies for the Ford Foundation working in Bangkok. David is one of the founding members of the Ethnic Arts Foundation that was launched in 1980. And through that foundation, he has a record of over 20 years of oftentimes lengthy visits to meet painters, Mithila painters, to discuss work, to purchase work for exhibitions, to return profits from sales, to meet local and Delhi-based scholars. And in 2003, along with the Ethnic Arts Foundation Board, they started this remarkable school, the Mithila Institute of Art, a free 2-year program for people living in the area. It was a competitive program, and they had 2 years of schooling to learn the tradition of Mithila art, which I had the delight of visiting at one point. David has curated 19 exhibitions in India and in South Africa and France and the United States, including of Mithila art, including at the San Francisco and Los Angeles Museums of Craft and Folk Art, the William Patterson Museum of Art in New Jersey, the South Asian Center at Berkeley, and many, many private galleries throughout the United States and also in France. He has written many articles on Mithila art, and he's the co-editor of a forthcoming book, Mithila Painting. And this is an international volume on the history and about contemporary Mithila art. So I'm really, really looking forward to that coming out. He also co-edited and wrote a book called Mithila Painting, the Evolution of an Art Form. And that book was so incredibly helpful to me as I did my own research and worked on the show. And David has written a wonderful 6-page article for the forthcoming catalog for this exhibition. And you can get a preview of that catalog on the Benton Museum website, the PDF version. And I'll have the hard copies soon. So I'm, again, really excited to hear what David is going to talk about as he launches this exhibition on Mithila art. And then you can follow that, hopefully by visiting the museum from now to July 31st, and hopefully coming to some of our other programs.
Can I come on now?
David, yes, you may start your talk.
Thank you, Catherine. You've done a lot of the introduction that I thought I might be doing, but I'll start, in fact, with removing, if I can, this image here. I don't want to leave the meeting. There we go. Okay. Let me go back. This whole pilgrimage that I've made having to do with Mithila paintings really started for me in 1977. 1977, I was living in New York City, and I heard a knock on the door in my home, and there was standing a fellow who I had gone to graduate school, and we, at the same time, we both got our PhDs in 1970. I hadn't seen him for 7 years. He arrived at my house, asked if he could come in, and had under his arm a roll of something. I had no idea what it was. He opened it up and laid it out on my dining room table, and it consisted of 35 absolutely stunning paintings, which of a sort that I had never seen before. There's a story that goes with this, but he and I had gotten to know each other in graduate school, and we would, at Chicago, and we would often, to get away from the school for a while, go down to the Art Institute in Chicago, which is one of the world's great art museums. And he had learned that I was interested in art, and I learned that he was. And so I wasn't all that surprised, but these paintings were nothing like anything we'd seen in the museum. He explained that they were the work of women painting in the Bihar, the Mithila region of Bihar, which is the north central part of India, which actually overlaps into Nepal as well. But the paintings all came from the Indian side of the Mithila region, and they were all by women, and they were incredibly beautiful. Some of them were brightly colored, others in many colors, others were in very severe tones of black and dark red. And it turned out that what those differences were which caste was doing the painting. The Brahmins, the highest caste in the community, were doing the very colorful paintings. The black and red paintings were being done by the Kayasta community, not the Kshatriya community, not the warriors, but the Kayast are accountants and scribes, and they have at home red and black ink, and their wives were doing paintings in red and black ink, presumably because those were the inks that were available at the time. What he explained, which was not really very clear until I saw some photographs, was that these were paintings on paper, which had begun to go on paper about 8 or 9 years earlier. There was an ancient wall painting tradition, which consisted of images of gods and goddesses and symbols of marriage. They were marriage paintings. You had a symbol of a marriage painting, and you wanted to have the gods and goddesses in those paintings. And I'll show you what one of them looks like right now. This is what one of the paintings. The photograph, 1938, was taken by a man by the name of Archer, W.G. Archer, who was a colonial bureaucrat assigned to this region in Bihar. And he had been there, got there in 1932, late in 1932. And in 1933, in January, there was a huge earthquake, which knocked down walls from all over the region, and it was felt in Nepal to Delhi. It was a monster earthquake. 10,000 people or more died in it. And he had to go out into the villages surrounding where he was living in the main town of Madhubani to inspect the damage and figure out how to proceed as the chief colonial officer in the area. What he discovered was these murals. And in 1938, 39, 40, he went back to this area and photographed the murals. The murals were on the inside of the buildings, inside of the homes of these wealthy families, the upper caste families. As mentioned, the Brahmin paintings tended to be very colorful. And what you're looking at now is a colorful painting. In fact, unfortunately, in 1938, they didn't have color film. He could only take black and white photographs. And so you've got a black and white photograph. And what you're seeing on the left is what's called a kobar, which is a stylized version of a lotus pond. Bihar in general and the Mithila region in Bihar in particular is very flat. It's immediately south of Nepal. And so all of the snow melt that comes off the first range of the Himalayas flows down through Bihar to the Ganges River. So this wintertime, there's a lot of water, and in springtime, there's a lot of water. And then in summer, there's a lot of monsoon. So the area is very wet. There are lots of ponds, and the ponds are filled with fish. And you will see two fish on the right-hand side. They are symbols of fertility. What you see on the left-hand side is the pond, and you see lovebirds in circles around a central circle. Those are symbolizing the couple getting married. And you see parrots also on the upper part of the left-hand side and over the right-hand side as well. Parrots are considered lovebirds. So this is what is sort of central to the marriage imagery. And it represents particularly the bride, because she's the one who's going to be fertile, thanks to the fish, and the hoped for fertility, thanks to the fish, and the love of the couple, thanks to the lovebirds and the parrots. On the right-hand side, you have a goddess. This is the goddess Durga. She's got anywhere from 4 arms to 20 arms, depending upon how the painter is painting her. There's a lot of variation. In each arm, she has some kind of a tool, a flower, something which she will use in the course of her being. The image that's on the wall here shows her seated on what they're called their vehicle. Almost all the major gods in the Indian tradition have vehicles, animals that are associated with them. And when you see that animal, you sort of know that that god is present, even if the god is not depicted. In this particular image, she is spearing a demon. You can see him in the lower left corner of the painting. This is a demon that all of the other male gods tried to kill and couldn't do it individually or collectively. So they all gave their weapons to Durga, and Durga then killed him. She is the mother goddess. She is the strongest goddess of them all. And you will see her again towards the end of this. One thing you will note immediately is that she is looking straight at you. And that's because when you have a god in your presence, you want to be able to look at them, and they want them to be They want to be looking straight at you. As you will see subsequently, and as you can see the little figure on her right-hand side, he's in profile. People, human beings are in profile. Gods look face on at you. Here's another version of the Kobar. Again, you see the circle with flowers this time, with the fish down below, and underneath it, there's that checkerboard item is actually a depiction of the sleeping mat on which the bride and groom sleep for the first 4 nights, but without consummating the marriage. These marriages were all arranged marriages. Often the bride and groom didn't know each other. And so they actually meet at the time of the marriage. And that mat is laid out on the floor in this room with an elderly woman to keep an eye on them, to make sure that nothing happens untoward while on the first 3 nights. And then on the 4th night, the old lady discreetly disappears and the marriage can be consummated. The figure of the woman on the other side, on the right-hand side, is an attendant. And again, as a human being, she's in profile. Alongside her is the other major component of the marriage wedding, marriage symbology, which is a stylized bamboo grove, which represents the groom and the groom's family lines, which presumably will be enhanced by the bride's fertility. And again, you see parrots on either side, suggesting how much love there is between the bride and the groom. These are 2 Brahmin paintings from Brahmin families and the interiors of their rooms. There would be, in both of these cases, more gods and goddesses on the other walls. He didn't, unfortunately, Archer didn't take a full array of all of the paintings in any one Kobar. He just took sort of samples of different paintings. Here's in another, in a Kayast family, the accountant family, a part of a Kobar, which shows the gods and goddesses that would be around. The first figure on the left is Parvati. The second figure, sort of with crossed legs, one floating underneath the other, is the god Shiva, her husband, Parvati's husband. And Parvati is the one god, the one goddess, who actually does not look out at you. She looks at Shiva. She's always depicted looking at Shiva because she's taking care of him. He's sort of a wild guy who lives on top of a mountain most of the time and spends most of his time in meditation and has very little knowledge of or interest in daily life. And as a consequence, he needs taking care of. And so she provides it to him. That's why she's always looking at him. In the middle is the god Ganesh, who is actually their son. And his vehicle is a rat, several rats, one on each side, one's below him. And alongside, partially cut off, is the god Brahma. And these are the gods that will appear in all of or most all of the Kobars. If you went around the whole room, you would see at least some of these gods, if not all of these gods. Let's go back. No, the wrong way. This is a first painting of or an early painting, 1975, when paintings had gone onto paper. This was bought by Ray Owens at the time when he was first there in 1976. As you can see, you've got here Ram. Ram is this figure of the Ramayana. This is Lakshman, his brother. this is Vishwamitra, the guru who accompanied them. And this is Sita up on top here. And what this documents is that during the Ramayana, whoops, sorry, go back, sorry, we got this going the wrong way. What this goes back to is the figure of Shiva who's sort of floating in midair. The painting tradition is, as you can see, two-dimensional, and figures can simply be wherever they fit into the scene. They don't have to be grounded. He's sort of floating above his mountain, which is that horizontal thing with the bump on it underneath his floating leg. She's floating. When the tradition of having figures floating wherever there's space for it has been carried over into the painting tradition. This was probably one of the 35 paintings that Ray Owens brought back and that I saw in New York when he showed them to me. Rama is a god at one level, but during the course of the legend of the Ramayana, he is also a human being. He's the son of a king. And so he and his brother and the guru behind them and Sita were all humans at that point. And so they could be put in profile. They aren't gods yet. They are, Ram is in fact one form of Vishnu. The god Durga can take 10 forms and the god Vishnu can take 10 forms. And one of Vishnu's 10 forms is Ram. And when he wants Ram to be a god, he becomes a god. But for the purposes of the Ramayana, he's a human being. Life gets complicated in the Indian tradition. Let's go on to the next. The Vishnu, Ram, and this is Krishna now that you see in the center of the image. Both of them are major gods in the Indian tradition, but they're not good gods for being in marriage paintings. Ram never appears, or practically never appears in marriage paintings, because he ends up having his wife abducted, or his wife is abducted because he's off chasing a deer. She's gone for 14 years in the palace of a evil king of Sri Lanka, or someone who most Indians take as an evil king. But she's never actually harmed there, never touched there by Ravana in Sri Lanka. But Ram isn't 100% sure that's right. And so he runs her through a trial by fire, which she manages to get through just fine, with all kinds of explanations for how that could be done. And he brings her back to his home kingdom of Ayutthaya, where the population says, no, she couldn't really have been faithful to you for all those years. And so he runs her through a second trial by fire, and ultimately, in some tellings, a third trial by fire. So this is a difficult marriage, and it's not one that you want to have in your marriage chamber when you are getting married or when your daughter is getting married. So she's not depicted there. But because the Ramayana was so popular, so well known all across India, the painters in Madhubani decided she would be a good subject, and the whole Ramayana would be a good subject for selling paintings across India. So they've added the Ramayana to their repertoire. Krishna, whom you're looking at now, is also a tricky character. He's a trickster, among other things. He always carries a flute. You can always tell it's Krishna when you see figure with the flute, because he's the only one that carries a flute. His vehicle is the peacock. You don't have a peacock in this painting, but he has a tree which is specifically his, and though it's hard to see, they're very small, it's a tree with especially round flowers, and that tree is sufficient to know that Krishna is present. Krishna is there when you see that tree. In this case, in this particular painting, Krishna has noted that the gopis, the milkmaids who follow around, all of them madly in love with him, have gone to swim in the river and left their saris on the ground, but he's picked them up and put them onto the limbs of the tree so that he can tease them for being partially undressed. They're still wearing something, but they're not wearing their proper clothes. He's just playing games with them in this painting, except for one. They're all protesting down here, the gopis, but this one is his true love, and she knows it. And so she's not protesting. She knows that he can do whatever he wants. And they actually have an illicit love affair. All the other gods who are married and seem to stay with their husbands and wives. Both Krishna and Radha, the gopi down here at the bottom, looking straight at you, are gods, but they're both married to someone else simultaneously. And so you don't really want that in the marriage chamber either. So there are very few paintings of Krishna and Radha in the marriage chambers. They're not appropriate for a marriage. This is a painting by a young woman who was a student at the art school that we set up, the Mithila Art Institute that Catherine mentioned. And it shows two women watering Krishna's tree, the kadam tree. And here you can see the circular flowers much more clearly. Watering a tree is a symbol of adoration, of appreciation, of prayerful appeal to the God who is there, that is present. The three figures on the side are mountains, and it's morning time. The sun has just come up. The little figure behind on the left is also a local hill, I suppose. But this is a painting. It's an invocation to the God Krishna without ever showing the God Krishna. And anyone in India would recognize that. But for someone from outside, it's a puzzle of what's going on here. But what it's part of is the repeated issue for foreigners to understand what's going on, because there are very specific things going on in the painting that any Indian will know, but the outsider needs to be informed about, and is not likely to have learned from her mother or her father or his mother or father in growing up. But in India, it's a totally different case. And that's what's represented here. I'm going to go down. This is a painting done by a 45, probably 48-year-old woman, 5 years after that painting that I just showed you, in a totally different style. And she has picked up the image of the two women watering the kadam tree, Krishna's kadam tree, and she's inserted Krishna watching them do that in the third mountain over on the right-hand side. She's also inserted two peacocks, one on the right corner and one on the left top corner, to show this is really Krishna's place. She also likes to put bird nests in the middle of the tree. You can see it right here. that's a bird nest with little birds in it. And it's a marker of how the tradition has been moving not just from the senior generations to the junior generation, the younger artists, but in fact, it goes both ways. And there are quite a few instances of paintings by young women at the school and not at the and some not at the school, which get picked up as ideas and as images, and then are painted by an older woman in her style. It isn't all top down or old painters to new painters. It's going in both directions. The painting tradition moves back and forth across the generations, which is a very nice thing to see. Here's a contemporary Kobar. If you recall, it has the pond in the middle with the lotus flowers and the fish that you would have in the earlier images. But let me go back to the earlier. Look at that Kobar or that Kobar, how simple it was, how undifferentiated it was. Now, when you come up to this, all sorts of things have been added. Also, what is particularly interesting, I think, is that the bamboo is now included in the painting right here, but it is shrunken and it sits in a corner, whereas the marriage of the bride has become the central image of the painting. In the Kobars, the bamboo, the groom, is usually of roughly the same size as the bride. There's a sense of equality. When the women started making money and selling paintings and becoming major contributors to the family economy, their status began to grow, which is symbolically recognized by the fact that they get center stage and the groom is present, but he's just on the side. And that's going to be true in all of the paintings of the Kobars. I have now 150 different paintings of Kobars, photographs. I don't have all the paintings, but every one of them is set up kind of like this. What else is in this painting is that's been added is actually a ceremony which takes place, a ritual that takes place within the marriage. And that is the groom, the bride, making an offering to an elephant, which is actually a marker of Parvati, who's over here with Shiva, because they are the ideal couple, where she's looking at him and he's there in your presence. There's the sun and the moon. There are various astrological figures up here, and all kinds of other small details. But again, it's the fish and the birds around the edge, all symbolizing love. It's in the process of moving to paper from walls. Everything gets elaborated dramatically. Let me go down. However, in the last 10, 12 years, as women are getting better educated and becoming more able to see the world inside their towns and on television and radio, they're become much more aware that of gender issues and feminist issues, and that marriages are not always going to work out terribly well, as I think most people in lots of the world have figured out. And what this does is a Kobar of a painting, of course, with the fish, marking the concern for fertility, and all the images around in the Kobar are now a fish pond, and you can see vaguely fish and turtles and snakes, But this is a black kobar. This is a worrisome kobar of someone who's single and a little bit worried about what it's going to be like to be married. She's going to be appreciated for her children that she produces, but that seems to be about all. There are no lovebirds in this. There's nothing to suggest that. Let's stay with this for a moment. She's concerned that the marriage is not going to come out as not necessarily going to come out as well as it might. Here's another image of that sort. This is the marriage of Ram and Sita, which is usually taken as a celebration that the Ram and Sita find each other and marry. But there are lots of legends and folk tales about how it was prophesied that, this is a good marriage, but it isn't going to end well. And it doesn't end well because not only does Ram ultimately send his wife Sita through 2 or possibly 3, depending upon which version you hear or to read, trials by fire. And even after she's proved herself in each of those occasions as having been pure and having been faithful to him, he evicts her from the palace and sends her off with his brother, Lakshman, into the forest to die in the forest, unaware that she's already carrying twins, his sons, whom she then raises as kshatriya, as warriors in the forest. It's a very tricky and difficult story. And the artist who did this, who's a young woman, not yet married herself, has done this very uncelebratory painting of the garlanding, which is the first major act in the engagement and in the marriage of the couple. Everybody is looking kind of worried and concerned about what's going to happen here. So if you have to know something about the story in order to be able to understand what's going on and why the painting takes such a tone that it does. This is yet another painting, Marriage is Strangulation. This is done by the same woman who did the Black Kobar, who is also, thinking that this is what's going to become. She did this painting before she got married. And in fact, she is now happily married and has a child. But she was not so sure about how it was going to work out. And look what she has done. She's put the flowers around the kobar, which is behind her, but with women inside rather than a flower inside. And all of the women are weeping. They're all crying. The groom, and in Mithila, men wear these very elaborate headdresses. The grooms wear very elaborate headdresses with leaves and flowers falling down over their face. And he's actually strangling her. She's being watched up here by these one-eyed figures. These are bird cages. Bird cages are used as symbols of what happens to women when they get closed down, when they're married and they're kept in purdah. And you can see the bird cages are falling. She's, oh, don't do that. Down below here, there are the pots and pans that she has to clean. And here's the mat on which the marriage would be consummated. And this is actually a clay stove, and here's a fire in the stove. She's being set on fire. Women are very concerned about fire in this region. Sita goes through fires. Bride burning is often it's decreasing in incidence, but it's still common. It still happens. Women get set on fire because they don't provide enough dowry, or their families don't provide enough dowry, or they don't provide children. It's not a pretty sight. It's getting increasingly rare, but it's still very much in the mind of young women that, maybe it'll happen to me. And this is part of that kind of insecurity that goes with this kind of insecurity. And this is actually an extraordinary depiction of it. What you're seeing here is the inside of a house and the outside at the same time. There's the groom, the husband, is pouring kerosene on his wife. Her arms are bound, and his mother, her mother-in-law, has lit a match, and she's about to light her daughter-in-law. However, there's a gang of protesters, women outside the house, who are protesting what's going on inside. There's a woman leaning in the window here, pouring kerosene on the mother-in-law, and one of the protesters is approaching the mother-in-law from behind and is about to light her, to catch her on fire. I asked the painter when I saw this painting, she was just finishing it at the time, has this ever happened? And she looked up at me and she said, no, but it should. That isn't the actual title of the painting, but that's the meaning of the painting, the idea behind the painting. And this is something which is on people's minds. Now you think of this in comparison to the placid and friendly images of the Kobar, and you've traveled a very great distance in the culture. This is another painting dealing with marriage. When women get married in India, the tradition, and in Mithila in particular, is that they get carried in a conveyance of some sort. Today, it's mostly in a tricycle or in a car, depending upon the wealth of the family, the groom's family. They come and pick her up and bring her home to his home. But when she gets there, she has to face in two directions. She has to take care of her husband's family. Fair enough, she's now married to him. But she also has to take care of continuing responsibility for her parents. And so she has to be going around and around and around, and her responsibilities go in both directions. She just has to go back and forth. Let's go back. She has to go back and forth. Marriage is difficult, and it's in itself. But when I asked her about this strange, empty white circle in the middle here, she said, that's the unanswered question. And I said, what unanswered question is this? She said, she looked at me and she said, well, if women have to take care of their husband's family and they have to take care of their parents' family, why is it they can't inherit from either family? All the inheritance goes through the boys, to the young men in the family, even if they're much younger than the wives. And this is the tradition in Mithila, and it remains the tradition. It's very powerfully felt that is the way things go. The Indian government has made it illegal, that it requires women to get a share of the inheritance of the family, but a woman would have to go to court and take her marital family or her parents' family to court to actually get it. And not very many women are willing or able to do that. And so there is this hanging question. which still hangs over women and overhangs this particular artist in particular, because she's married into a family on one side which is relatively wealthy. Her parents are very poor, but they've made it very difficult for her to provide for her parents. This is another painting by that same woman. This is an early painting of the woman by her. This is a recognition of sort of the bifurcation of the complexity, call it, of a human being and of women in particular. The woman facing out to the left is radiant. There's the golden figure, the golden area around her face is positive, is powerful, but she's radiating out into a dark and difficult world. On the other hand, where she's facing to the right and facing down, she's surrounded by snakes. There's a snake wrapped around her legs, who is marker of her sexual control by men. Men are difficult, and men are snakes. The large python, multi-headed python in front of her and top of her are controlling her socially and politically. And yet she has to give obeisance. She has to offer flowers to her husband. She's radiant at one level and yet submissive at another level. This is a very difficult move to make. And she's troubled by it and subservient to it. When I asked her about this up here, what looks like a snake's head on her forehead, she said to me, "And the men have captured our minds. They've captured our minds. They've controlled us. They've bred into us this notion that men are superior, men are controlling, women are simply subservient to women. Women are subservient to men." This is another version of the same kind of issue. On the right-hand side, you have a pregnant woman, and she has a boy in the fetus. There's a fetus. She is the background for her is lotus flowers, something beautiful, something good, something positive. She has a boy. The other woman on the left has a little girl in the uterus. And what does she have? Snakes behind her, difficulties behind her, problems behind her. And this is very much and continues to be an issue in India. It's in some areas of India, it's getting better. Everywhere in India, it's still an issue to some degree. The sex ratio in the country tends to be for every 100 boys, 90 girls. It changes over time, but basically, boys are preferred to girls very dramatically. Again, a marker of the dismay and the discouragement of a lot of women. A lot of women get beyond it. And rich families and upper caste families may feel it less than poorer families, but not necessarily. But it's a depiction by these are all different artists now. of the uncertainty as to what their role is, what the gender relations are, and what they ought to be. This is a painting of what proceeds from that. It's a painting of an abortion clinic done by a woman who's actually worked as a social worker, and she knows what she's depicting. And what it shows is a woman on a gurney over here seeing the ultrasound of her child, her impending child, and it's a boy and it's a girl. Below her here is her daughter begging her mother to keep the child, not to abort it. Above here, this is mother-in-law saying, you've got to abort this child. We can't have more little girls in the family. This is the doctor with the scissors in her hand, and in the coils embedded in a snake, and with the coils, within her coils are 5 little aborted girls. The young woman who's next for the ultrasound, who's worried about what's going to happen with her and her child, her fetus. And these are 2 nurses over here, dressed in Western clothes. The notion of using this kind of technology is something which has come in from the West, and the nurses are part of it. This is illegal. It is illegal all over India in that by national law, but it still continues quite regularly. And talking with the woman who painted this, she said that when she was a young woman going to school, she would pass by the doctor's office where these abortions were being done every day. And she said she was so infuriated by what she learned that she did this painting ultimately when she was an adult, and has just 1 child, a daughter. She wasn't going to fail to have 1 child at least. She did the painting with that anger in mind. Sitting here on the table in front of her is the hypodermic needle and gloves and pads and scissors and a 500 rupee note, which is what it cost at that time to come now. At that time, to do an abortion. This is in the contemporary world in a way that you don't see anything like this in the earlier paintings. This is another extraordinary painting. In this case, I had to ask the artist what was going on here. And she said, well, in the past, when people from outside the immediate family came to your home, you had to disappear as a woman. You had to disappear behind a curtain or behind a door into another room that cut you off so that you were not seen by whoever it is from the outside, but that you could sort of sometimes peek through the curtain. But she said, and that's what you're seeing here, the eyes peeking through the curtain. But what she said is going on now is that women are beginning to join together. And as you can see, there are 5 women now breaking through the curtain, joining together and breaking through the curtain. That the feminist, it's not even feminist, it's women's rights, are beginning to emerge in the Indian situation, but it's still an issue, but it's something positive is beginning to happen. And that's what she was trying to depict with this painting. Going beyond marriage and family issues, there are now a lot of paintings dealing with very contemporary issues. And here's an extraordinary image of 9/11. This painting is done by a woman who, all of her other paintings that I've seen at least, are on ritual activities. But she was so moved and disturbed when 9/11 happened that she did this painting of the 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Towers. And it's quite extraordinary because the planes are already on fire, even though they have not hit the towers. And there's smoke billowing everywhere, and damaged pieces of the buildings falling already. She's got different points in time operating in the same image. And it's the buildings are not quite straight anymore. They're a little bit cockeyed. They're not standing up straight, but they capture what happened, and so clearly in the imagery. And she's a woman who lives not in a town. She lives in a small village about 25 miles outside of the town. But she's probably traveled very little, but she somehow had a sense of what had happened, seen a picture of something somewhere, excuse me, and depicted it quite brilliantly. This is another political painting. What it shows is the flood in a village is because it is a very wet area, as I mentioned earlier, because of the water coming down from the Himalayas. There are floods quite frequently, and there are a lot of floods in this particular area where of Mithila. And what you see here is a wealthy family here going off in a boat with a boatman, having left behind their big locked house. You can see the padlocks on the door there, leaving to the poor in the community to pull out of the water the drowned and the dead, and to come now. And to mourn the dead person here. When an eye is open, clearly the person is alive. When the eye is sort of slit like this, you can tell that they're dead. She's dead. He's probably dead. You can't tell from that. But they're mourning over here, and the poor people suffer the damage, and the rich people ride off in the equivalent of the SUV in New Orleans and Katrina. This is the village version of Katrina, though she knew nothing about Katrina. This woman comes from the painter, that's just as an aside, comes from the very lowest caste of fishermen. They are at the very bottom of the caste system, but they're probably just in the caste system, but just at the very bottom of it. She has just won the highest award India provides for art, and it has been celebrated widely in the press and then locally, of course, as well. She's illiterate, numerate. She's never gone to school, but she's actually written her biography, an autobiography in paintings, which has been published in India. It's a quite extraordinary book. Her name is Dulari Devi, if you're interested. It's the contrast between the rich and the poor is something which you rarely see in these paintings, but she is something that she knows very well, and she's painting it. Another international scene, though. This is the tsunami in Fukushima. People were, again, astonished by this, and this was seen on television locally. But one of the painters decided that she was going to do an image which captured all of the chaos that was created by that tsunami as just an astonishing and terrifying event. And you can see the atomic piles. One is still standing, but one has broken down and the top of it has come off. The buildings are cracked and falling. People are running in all directions. Everything is turned upside down. People are caught in buses. And, it's a total disaster. What you're seeing is everybody's in profile. They're all people. Again, there are no gods and goddesses in this. But that is the tradition. And what the artists say when you talk with them about that is that, yes, these paintings are two-dimensional. There's no horizon line. There's no rounding or shading. There's no people can float in the air, and these are floating images. That's perfectly okay. And we can, as the artists say, we can express anything we want to express using the conventions of the tradition. These are the same conventions of the tradition that are on the walls, on the wall paintings, which continue. Much less so now than they did before, but they still continue, and wall paintings are still being done. But the artists, of course, by now have seen lots of different art forms, but they insist that the Mithila painting tradition is fully capable of expressing anything that they want to express, and there's no reason for them to move into other kinds of traditions. Remember, the very first image I showed you was the goddess Durga, slaying a demon, riding on a lion. Well, since COVID has happened, the figure of Durga has been, there have been dozens of paintings about COVID, and the figure of Durga has been invoked. And here you have Durga with the multiple arms and medical things in her hands, and a huge hypodermic needle killing the demon COVID. You can see him here. Here's his face and the little COVID circles all around. And she's using her she's Durga, the mother goddess, the protective goddess, is now killing COVID with a hypodermic needle. Come now. Shifting gears a little bit. I've talked, all of the paintings above, or almost all the paintings above, have been by either Brahmins or Kayasthas or other caste Indians, and almost all of them are by women. This is by a young man, but who's come from the Dalit community. The Dalits are communities that are regarded as polluted, as too low to be even in the caste system. So they're either below the caste system or outside of the caste system, depending on who you talk to. There are a lot of variations on how they're understood. They're mostly agricultural workers, farm laborers. And there's a large community of them in Mithila. Excuse me. Because they're farm workers, they're very interested in nature and animals. And what you've got here is a celebration of the natural world. They're also very interested in trees. As you can see, there are a variety of trees growing here, and the sun is there, and a peacock up here, and elephants down here, and birds and fish and lions, a lion and a tiger, birds nesting. Whoops, sorry. Birds nesting up here. There's a love of nature and living in nature, something which you never see or rarely see in the upper caste paintings. The upper caste paintings deal with gods and goddesses and spiritual matters, religious matters, political matters. The lower caste agricultural laborers deal with their world, and they do it quite splendidly. We've got here, for example, is a scene of village life set in a tree, set in what the artists have come to call the tree of life, term that's widespread all over the world now, with itinerant tattoo artists who come around once a year to villages and put tattoos on people, but on request, mostly on women, but men have tattoos as well, and they're regarded as both protective and decorative. But they come and they become part of the community, and I've seen them there on a couple of occasions. They bring their tents with them, and they bring their animals with them, and they work in the villages, in the surrounding villages, giving tattoos, and then they move on to another village in a kind of a slow cycle. And it's again a depiction of village life, something which again the upper castes would not think of depicting. And the Dalits had probably were, or almost certainly were, painting back in the early part of last century, and probably even before that, but no one has ever recorded them. Archer, who took the photographs that I showed you at the beginning, never bothered to do anything with them at all. He mentions that but dismissively, he mentions that, oh yes, they do some paintings, but I'm not interested in them. He was only interested in the upper caste paintings, which he thought were quite wonderful, and I can't disagree with him. The tattoos that the tattoo artists place on people have become, and early on became, a basis for doing the actual paintings that they do. They've used tattoos, and these are all tattoo figures. Here they're birds. Whoops! Oh, this is too sensitive. There are birds and people, dancers and elephants and fish. There are all kinds of creatures that have been divided up in sort of a geometrical forms. And the tattoo painting is very often, and you'll see this, I think, in the exhibition, takes geometrical shapes, circles or straight lines or upper vertical lines or horizontal lines. And here the artist has put it in this unusual sort of star pattern. Let's see if we do it wrong every time. Again, this is again a Dalit painter. This is one of the few guys who's painting, one of the few men, a young man, and it's an extraordinary painting. In general, the Dalit painters are much more innovative, creative, and experimental in their work than the upper caste painters, who see the painting tradition, as I mentioned, as fully capable of expressing what they want, but they're not playful with the forms of the images, whereas he has started with a tree in the center here, and it's fish going up and fish all around it, and these are the leaves of adjacent trees around it. But what's buried in it are two peacocks, which are very hard to see. But here's the head of the peacock, of one of them. Here's the head of the other peacock, and the neck is very long. And then you have the long feathers back here, and the long feathers on this side are back here. This is an extraordinary painting. It's now in a museum in San Francisco. It's unlike anything else, but it's precisely this kind of continuing growth and elaboration and expansion of the tradition and of the evolution of the tradition that has been so fascinating for me to watch. And we're getting to the end now. Just a quick set of new gods and goddesses. This figure riding on an elephant is Raja Salhesh, who is the major god for the Dusad, for the Dalit painters. This is his wife riding behind him. This is his brother, Motiram here. This is his nephew, and these are accompaniments. And Salhesh, their god, has the capacity of expanding himself or sending himself to other places to keep an eye on things. And so this up here is Raja Salhesh keeping an eye on that, what's going on. And this over here is Raja Salhesh, simultaneously with his being here in full figure. He has this magical capacity to be in multi places at once. Let's see if we can. Another set of gods that are now in the minds of people in the area. Mithila was in the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century was a heavily Buddhist area. And people still know that, even though Buddhism is minuscule now in the area. But here's Buddha, and here's Jesus. Compared, in a way, they're both the same. The figures are looking at each other, and they're quite identical figures, except that Buddha has a background of lotuses, of the beautiful flower of lotuses, and Jesus has the background of crucifixions. Very different tone, and a kind of a statement, I think, by the artist as to the relevancy to what her life she wants to have. This is a painting that was just done a couple of years ago by a young woman that quite blew me away. It shows the life of Buddha. Here's Buddha being born, Gautama is his name, from the hip of his mother, which is how the legend explains him. Here he's grown up in the palace, in this beautiful palace. It's a royal palace. And he's leaving, going out the door. This is the door with the three balls. He's leaving to see the world. Over here on the right-hand side, he has come back with a begging bowl. He's now a monk. Whoops. Oh, stop that. He's now a monk. And what you see in the center is the moment of enlightenment when Buddha has become a woman. Buddha as a woman. I asked the painter, what is this? Is Buddha a woman? And she looked at me and said, no, he's not a woman, but he's not necessarily a man either. He can be just as well a woman as a man. He can be a she. Buddha can be a she. Buddha can be a woman. A thought that I must admit it never occurred to me, but she was quite adamant about what she had in mind there. This is the last painting in the series. This is painting just of the joy of going out into the rain during the monsoon. It's been so hot and so sticky for so many months. Suddenly the rain comes down and you just go outside and have fun jumping in puddles. I hope that this array of paintings gives you some sense of the extraordinary evolution of this painting tradition, the expansion of the repertoire, the dealing with the world, personal world and the international world and the spiritual world that's going on in and among the Mithila painters. For me, it's absolutely fascinating to see this kind of expansion. It's reminiscent of what happened in medieval Europe when you went from wall paintings of gods and goddesses and saints to the Renaissance, and you got paintings of soldiers and kings and queens and farmers and all kinds of people battle scenes. The paintings move from the ritual imagery, the ritual events, to the larger world surrounding the artists. And this is what's been happening in Mithila. It's been a move from the walls and ritual to all these other kinds of expressions, but all within maintaining the commitment to the conditions of the Mithila painting tradition. I will stop here, and hopefully there will be some questions to be answered.
On behalf of the rest of the audience that's muted, David, I will clap for everybody. And thank you for such an elaborate discussion of Mithila art, from traditional imagery and contemporary imagery. And Bandana, one of my colleagues in sociology, has asked, are some of these staying in the Benton? There's only, I think, 2 of the images that David showed in his presentation that are similar to works that are in the collection. And when David and I discussed his talk, we thought, rather than showing just the images that are in the exhibition, which people have plenty of time to see and can see in the catalog, that he would show a greater range of work that's made in terms of the stories of artists that you've learned from talking to people over the years so long. And so what you see in the Benton Museum is eventually a bequest to the Benton, but it will be exhibited in other places before it reaches its final home. And David, there was another question that I answered that was about the terminology Madhubani and Mithila, that the work sometimes was called both Madhubani and Mithila because Mithila was the district and Madhubani was the primary town. But since so much work is made in other towns outside of that the artists prefer that it be called Mithila and not Madhubani. But sometimes that's the terminology that's used also. And the question I had for you is about the transition of work when it went from the walls to paper, you know, in terms of what happened, how did that happen, who allowed that to happen in terms of the different groups and efforts to help artists in the district.
Sure. 1967-68 was a terrible drought in the Mithila region. Agriculture had collapsed and there was fear of famine. There had been, people remembered the Bengal famine of 1942 when millions of people died. I think it was something on the order of 2 million people died in that famine. And the Indian government was very concerned that it not be repeated in Bihar, in the northern part of Bihar, in the Mithila region. And the head of the All India Handicraft Board, a woman by the name of Pupil Jayakar, who was a close friend of Nehru, got the idea of sending a artist from Bombay up to Mithila with boxes, crates of paper and inks and paints to encourage the women to start painting on paper, because they could sell those paintings if they were on paper. Whereas when the paintings were on the walls, they had no economic value. They had ritual value, but no economic value. And so this fellow from Bombay, his name was Bhaskar Kulkarni, came up to this region and started trying to get the women who had just done wall paintings to start painting on paper. And he agreed to take the paintings that they did on paper, bring them to Delhi, sell them for him, exhibit them and sell them, and return the profits to them, to more generally to distribute the profits. The profits were not going just to the artists whose paintings had been done. And he had a difficult time getting that started because they had never done anything like that. But slowly, a small group of them came forward and said, yes, we'll try it. When they started getting money back from what they were doing, and they were getting the paintings in Delhi just sold out immediately. That first painting by Sita Devi, the one of Ram and Sita and Vishwamitra and Lakshman, that was very much in the style. Oh, there's one more painting here that I missed showing you. I thought it was over. Well, I'll talk about that one separately. They ended up making enough money, and it was public enough that scores and then hundreds of women started to paint. There was just a tremendous capacity to paint, tremendous aesthetic capacity in the region, fostered by the wall paintings. But among those painters, some of them were actually brilliant painters, as it turned out. And that's how it really began on paper. Papers were small. They were 22 inches by 30 inches. So they had to compress everything, but they put a great deal more detail into the painting. They could paint a great deal more detail than you could on a rough wall, on a rough mud wall. So you get the elaboration on paper of something which had to remain fairly simple on a wall, even if quite beautiful on a wall. This last painting, if I may insert it here, is actually a painting it's a portrait of Sita Devi, the woman who did the painting of Ram and Sita at the very beginning. And what it shows is that she has broken through the circle of culture, the circle of constraints on women's life, and she's doing something which is productive outside the circle. And she's quite beautifully, she's beautifully depicted, and she was in fact a very beautiful woman. This is the actual artist who did the painting. Her name is Rani Jha. She had taken Sita Devi as her master, and what she's saying here is that she's also gone beyond the circle of tradition, but she's also gone right through the edge of the painting out into the world. This line goes right through the frame of the painting. She's gone beyond the immediate frame of the culture, and she's become an international figure. The figure behind her, she's explained to me on two different occasions differently. On the first occasion, she said, this is just a little girl wondering if she can do something like that. The next generation, if she can break through the curtain, break through the frame as well. The second time I talked with her about it, some months later, a year later, she said, actually, that's me. When I was a little girl, I was very dark, and my parents didn't think I would ever get married. And so, but I was dreaming of doing something important, but I was only dreaming at that point in time. So this is really multiple generations, but this is in the homage to Sita Devi. This is the self-portrait, and this is either just a little girl or her as a little girl, but breaking through the frame entirely.
Wonderful, David. That's a great image to end on. I have a question from Vandana, that the latest paintings by men seem to be so similar to the Secret Life of Trees series by Adivasi painters from several states in central India.
That's very interesting. I don't know about the Gand paintings. That's true. But there certainly is trees again. And again, these are people who work with the land. They're agriculturalists. The trees are important figures in their lives in a way that Brahmins and Kayasta who live in towns or live in large houses and are much less engaged with nature. With the Adivasis, the tribal, what used to be called tribal populations, are very much like the Dalits, who are themselves agricultural laborers. So I'm not surprised, though stylistically their paintings are quite different. But the subject matter, that's right, they are similar.
David, there are actually no other questions, and you've given us quite a full array of information here. And I think we're actually just at the end of our period of time here. So I thank you again for launching our exhibition through your explanation of work, and then people can read your enlightening essay in the catalog. There'll be copies at the museum, and also the PDF copy is and then this will be recorded and on the Benton Museum's YouTube channel for other people to review later. And again, I really express my gratitude for your legacy of work that you've done in terms of your research and your focus on Mithila art and your engagement and tireless work to get to know artists and learn the individual stories and bring this work to a wider audience. And it was the donation actually of 20 images from the Ethnic Art Foundation that is the cause for this exhibition, that it allowed me to focus on the exhibition on Mithila art. So if not for David's involvement in that organization as the president, and then the decision, because the foundation, I believe, is going to be ending. And so the works from the collection were being dispersed to different individuals that would be able to get them out to the public. So I'm incredibly grateful that work has contributed to our exhibition as well.
I'm delighted that the Benton is going to have the paintings. We're trying to get it out to large numbers of paintings like this, 20, 30 paintings at a time, to different museums that are really interested in the art, and get it better known. It's much more widely known in Europe than it is in the United States. But we're trying to extend it all over the world. We will hopefully to museums in Europe and in India and in Japan as well.
Great, wonderful. Look forward to that, and to this show traveling to Avery Point in 2023 too. So, and hopefully, and some of the works going on to the show that John Bowles is curating at Radford University in Virginia will be moving there after they leave the Benton too. So the Festival of Art will be able to continue, and more people will be able to see it.
That's great. I'm delighted you're moving it around. It's been a pleasure to do this.